Hello, Cinematary listeners. This is Zach Dennis, your host, with a quick aside before we start this episode. We are running a new promo at cinematary.com and giving away some copies of The King of Staten Island. That is the latest from celebrated comedy director Judd Apatow, and it stars SNL star Pete Davidson. The heartfelt comedy is going to be available on digital, Blu-ray, and DVD on August 25th. But before that happens, Cinematary is offering you a chance to win a copy for free. It's real easy. All you got to do is send us on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram a picture of you subscribing to the Cinematary podcast. Let us know that you are a subscriber and that you appreciate the podcast. Also, hey, for the heck of it, why don't you throw in a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. But if you have not heard of The King of Staten Island or are wondering what you get with this Blu-ray and DVD, you get features of over 2 hours of hilarious, never-before-seen bonus content, including alternate endings, deleted scenes, and a gag reel. This film, of course, was inspired by Pete Davidson's own true-life story and also stars Marissa Tomei, Bill Burr, Bel Powley, Maude Apatow, and Steve Buscemi, and the Rolling Stone called it an emotional and comic knockout. Again, this is the latest work from Judd Apatow, and Pete Davidson is one that I know a lot of people are big fans of. So if you are a fan of Apatow or Davidson and you want to get a copy of The King of Staten Island, be sure to subscribe to Cinematary, or at least show us that you have subscribed to Cinematary, and send that to our Facebook, our Instagram, or our Twitter. I usually call those out at the end of the episode. Thank you again. Now let's start the episode. Welcome to episode 313 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Andrew Swafford,
Jessica Carr,
Cam Watson.
In today's episode, we'll be talking about movies that we saw this week in part 1, and in part 2, we will be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1987's RoboCop. But first, let's jump into movies that we saw this week, and we're gonna go off script and go with we're gonna dive into the world of TV. Did you guys know that TV's it's been having a moment? There's something called prestige television that is sweeping the airwaves, that seems to be big dollar tickets. And I keep hearing something like The Sopranos and Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones, but I don't know about those. I just know about this wonderful Japanese sitcom called Midnight Diner, and that's prestige TV to me. Jessica, I'm gonna let you and Cam introduce it.
Yeah, it's a super good TV show that we started watching on Netflix. I started watching it because, we're in a pandemic and you don't feel like sitting and watching a 2-hour-long movie. You just want to watch something comforting for 20 to 30 minutes in snippets so that you can mentally handle what's coming. And so I was on Instagram, and one a Japanese food critic that I follow posted that her favorite TV show is this show called Midnight Diner on Netflix. And I was like, I need to check this out. And I was pretty much sold whenever I saw what the main character looked like. His name is the Master, and he has a scar over one of his eyes, and he's this mysterious figure that cooks for people. He has a diner that is open from midnight until 7 o'clock in the morning, and he has a very interesting group of regulars that come in, and each episode focuses on the different regulars that show up. And there is also this dish that is spotlighted in the episode, where at the end of the episode they show you a tip on how to make it. So what's really weird about this TV show is how cinematic it is. It feels a lot like a movie because you are so submerged in this world, and it's really weird because you start to feel like you're a part of the diner too. The diner itself is a character in the show, and we don't really know a lot about the Master, which is the chef of the diner, but he is this kind of like mysterious figure that knows a lot about his regulars and is kind of like this like guiding force for them. Like there are lots of times where he gives them advice or like tells them what to do, and it ends up helping them. But like, I don't know, man. I can't even think of anything that would compare to it in America. Like, it is very melancholic, but it is also like there's like something so serene and like peaceful about it.
I would say like it's in the same somewhat in the same conversation as something like Cheers, where it's like a group of people who really don't have any connection to one another, who meet at like a location and kind of have, adventure stories or hijinks or whatever from that location. But it's not like Cheers in that, like, it's not like a weekly type thing. It feels very much more contained.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and whereas like things like Cheers or more like sitcoms as we kind of like typically see them here, like how they kind of usually go over the course of like a couple of days to tell a small story about a couple of people or a couple of the characters. Midnight Diner, it's like you rather than doing something like that, you meet, seems like you meet like a new character every episode, and rather than go over like a couple of days in their life where they're in some kind of like quirky situation, a lot of the episodes like take place over the course of what seems like months. Like it like takes a really, really long time, and like really, really fleshes like a story out for like a singular character, and then that character will kind of just like drop into the background for the rest of the show, and like kind of show up here and there every once in a while, but not really like be the focus anymore, like they were for sort of like the first episode that they were in, or that they were the focus of.
Yeah, I think that it does a really good job of kind of like highlighting what I would call more or less like the misfits of Japanese society. Like, it's a lot of people who would frequent a diner between like midnight and 7 o'clock are people who work in like the entertainment industry, like the adult entertainment industry, and also like Yakuza, and like there are lots of characters who work in these places that these stories like aren't told in any other like media for them.
Yeah, and it's also just it's like a nice kind of, it feels like a nice like community space, like a just a place of not really like like just a sharing of ideas, but just kind of it's like everybody's kind of taking in just the moment of what's happening, and just kind of enjoys like a nice hot meal and some drinks. Just like the conversation around there, it feels like this wonderful little kind of community spot. The one episode I want to kind of highlight before we move on is, I think, my favorite episode. I've watched the first 6 episodes of the first season. I think there's 3 seasons and 10 episodes in each one. And there's an episode midway through this first season where you have one of the regulars brings this, I guess, renowned food critic in Tokyo to the restaurant, kind of showing him what like real food, compared to like the high price ritzy stuff tastes like. And while he's there, this older man comes in and orders a plate of buttered rice, and I forgot what the other dish he gets the first time, but he gets something else with it. But he gets the buttered rice, and he has the the hot rice and the butter, and everybody like in the entire diner watches as he lets the butter melt into the rice, and then once that's finished, he like moves the rice a little bit over the butter and then dabs like a very little droplet of soy sauce on it, and then stirs it up and begins to eat it. And so the food critic orders the same dish and like becomes like all emotional from it. And so he starts like frequenting, right? Well, actually, before that, after he eats the dish, the older gentleman like plays this really melancholy, sweet kind of like Japanese folk song. and then leaves, and like that's his whole deal is that he comes and plays a song and he gets a free meal. And so the food critic starts frequenting the diner because the master tells him, yeah, he comes every Thursday and does this, and so he keeps coming and coming and coming, and then finally you kind of learn that the older gentleman is working at the factory and picking up more time to more hours, more work, and so he's unable to fulfill his Thursday promise to the diner. And so one night he comes in to kind of say thank you to the diner owner for letting him play there and giving him food. And it's Thursday night, and so the food critic is there, and the food critic goes into this memory and shows that the older gentleman, when he was younger, actually provided guitar lessons for him and kind of had a thing going with his sister for a long time before he eventually left the town. And then you have like this wonderful kind of long shot, as long as you can kind of get in the small diner space. And you have the two men, the food critic on the left and the older gentleman on the right, and they're both eating this buttered rice, and like they like do this slow zoom in, and then finally, like as the background music kind of swells up, you get like this medium shot of the two men like emotionally eating this buttered rice, and it's just so good. It's so great. It like has this wonderful melodrama to it. And so if you're looking for something that just kind of soothes your soul, I would recommend Midnight Diner because it's pretty wonderful. So Netflix.
Check it out on Netflix. You can learn.
Are the floodgates wide open now? Can people just talk about TV on Cinematary every week if they want to? Just out of curiosity, no judgment.
Well, I listened to you guys talk about Twin Peaks, so
I knew it was coming.
I get my Midnight Diner, baby.
I'm not. I'll just for the record say that I'm not talking about it because I'm like Midnight Diner is cinema. I'm not doing it because of that. It's because it implements some very cinematic techniques that I find to be incredibly effective, and just want to highlight that to show that it's there's
cinematic techniques like moving pictures.
Sure, but I mean it's also perfect in but it's perfect in like an episodic like setting. Like it wouldn't work as like just a movie. Like it works as a sitcom that I guess you would watch from week to week or episode to episode, because it would seem weird to have a movie end with a recipe. Like, I mean, more movies should do that, but like I'm just saying.
Has it been revealed, like, what Andrew's been working on? Is that a thing?
Yeah, he talked about it for, like, an hour in the Patreon.
I don't know how soon it's going to happen, but, I talked about it on a Patreon episode we did. But, yeah, during quarantine, I had percolating a script about things that had come out during quarantine that were kind of on the borderline of being classified as movies and not movies. And I never quite got to the end of it because A, motivation during quarantine, B, getting distracted by other things like school reopening being a disaster, and C, like the landscape of film continuing to change to the point where I never knew when a good time to stop was, because the next thing is coming any day now. One of the original idea was I was going to put it out the day that theaters reopened, but that kept getting pushed back. And now theaters in Knoxville are supposed to reopen this Friday, 2 days from when we're recording this, and who knows if that will actually happen or what that will look like. But the best conclusion I could come to in trying to work out what a good definition of what a movie is in all cases is like moving pictures. I really think that there's a very strong case to be made that there's very little difference between TV and movies. So I for one welcome any like TV show discussion happening on Cinematary.
Okay.
To be honest,
well, I'm glad we made him happy. Well, how about we toss it over to you and you talk about some moving pictures.
I got some moving pictures for you. Firstly, I'd like to talk about Tesla, which we also have a review of on the Cinematary website this week from Reed Ramsey. Very good review, by the way. I would encourage you to go read his review. He has a different take on the movie than me, so go kind of get both sides of it here. But Michael Almereyda is a director who I've actually not seen anything by before. This is my first movie by him, but his reputation definitely precedes him. I think he's most well known for his adaptation of Hamlet that came out around the year 2000 or 1999 that stars Ethan Hawke as Hamlet and famously has Ethan Hawke doing the to be or not to be speech inside a Blockbuster. He also did a movie 2 or 3 years back called Marjorie Prime. That was kind of an interesting, like, time travel-y, sci-fi, dystopia. People compared it to Black Mirror kind of thing. Nathan really liked it. This movie, Tesla, as the title suggests, is a biopic of sorts of the famous early inventor who worked alongside Thomas Edison. This also has Ethan Hawke in the lead role. It's a movie with kind of wacky casting, to be honest. It has Ethan Hawke as Tesla, who does a really like pitch perfect job. He looks like Tesla looks in every picture you've ever seen of Tesla. It also has Kyle MacLachlan as Thomas Edison doing an interesting performance, and Jim Gaffigan as this guy named George Westinghouse, who was Tesla's patron for a time. And he's wearing this really ridiculous mustache that made me actually not recognize him for several minutes into his performance. But the thing that makes Tesla kind of interesting is how much it completely sidesteps all cliches and conventions about biopic filmmaking. Like, not only is there no standard rise and fall structure in the same way that you're seeing with like every music biopic that apparently never saw Walk Hard, but also the way that it's shot is really unusual in a way that I could see people really getting a charge out of. I think it was shot on a really, really low budget, and so they work around their technical limitations in interesting ways. Like, I don't think at any point, maybe one scene, but aside from that, I don't think at any point anyone is actually standing outside. I think that you're mostly getting shots of these kind of cramped, dark interiors. And anytime you have characters who are standing out in nature or something, they're standing in front of rear projection. And it's like really obviously rear projection, to the point where I think there's a shot where Tesla's standing in front of what's the big waterfall in Canada? Sorry.
Niagara Falls.
Niagara Falls. He's standing in front of Niagara Falls, but the image he's standing in front of is a still image. So like the water is not rushing behind him. So they're like really leaning into that. There's also this weird framing device where one of the actresses in the film, she plays Tesla's love interest, but she's also sort of playing the narrator, and she is a narrator in the present time, but dressed as her character from the past, and she's like Googling Nikola Tesla and like scrolling through the Google image search results for him and stuff like that, and always talking about these figures in terms of how many Google results they have today, which is a meant to illustrate like their relative like widespread appeal or widespread success. Like, how well did people know them, or how well do people know them today? What kind of legacy did they leave behind? So that's a weird way to frame things. She also interrupts certain scenes and says like, well, this really didn't happen that way, and then kind of like rewinds and they do it a different way. Another weird moment is, and this is actually something I did not catch, but Reed pointed it out in his review. There's a moment where Kyle MacLachlan's Thomas Edison pulls out an iPhone and just like starts scrolling around on his iPhone. So like, it's a biopic that is like constantly thumbing its nose at the prospect of historical accuracy, or the idea that we could ever represent history accurately. All we're really doing is representing our idea of history based on the information we have now. Who knows how much information has been lost or misrepresented. So it's interesting in the way the images are constructed. It's interesting in the way that it goes about constructing a reality to wrap itself around. But in doing that, in like kind of eschewing all of these standard melodrama, like standard like tools of melodrama, to me, it found itself sort of devoid of any drama at all. And I couldn't bring myself to care about the characters or really bring myself to follow many of their arcs, to be honest, because everything felt like so disconnected both from reality and from like other scenes in the film that like it stopped being compelling after a while, because for a little bit I could find myself just kind of like being like, goo-goo-eyed at the weird way they were using rear projection and the weird way they use lights and stuff like that. But after you get past your like initial fascination with that, it still has to be a compelling story, because it is still a narrative film, and it didn't clear that bar for me. So I was honestly pretty bored throughout a lot of this. But it is a really interesting piece of work, and I could see why people who love it. So, listener, maybe you're one of the people who will love this movie. It is definitely worth considering, I think. That is a good question. But is it? Hold on. Tesla. I don't see it on Amazon. But if it's not out now, it will be out very soon. Reed was granted a screener to review it for Cinematary, and I may or may not have viewed it through that portal.
Cool. Abusing our powers. Let's get it on the pod.
Yeah, good to have that documented and out in public.
Thank God for edits.
You're the only person that does that. Like, you're the only person that shares screeners with other people. No one else on Cinematary Nobody else has ever done this.
Of doing such a thing.
No. Nobody else has ever done that.
I'm promoting the movie right now, by the way. That's what the screener is for. Anyways, any like thoughts or questions about Tesla before I move on to my other thing?
No, Mr. Swafford.
Thanks for your feedback. I also wanted to talk about some other moving pictures by a Japanese director named Takashi Mikano. He's an avant-garde filmmaker. I caught one of his films several years back at Big Ears. It was a movie called 2012. Despite the fact that it was not released in 2012. And it was a movie that really stuck out to me at that year's festival because it was a 30-minute short, and it was almost exclusively, or it was exclusively, just different representations of the color blue. You were looking at all these different layered close-up images of blue objects and blue surfaces with various textures, and they were all just like stacked on top of each other to such a degree that they sort of like melded into this one hypnotic kind of ghostly image. And I was reminded of his work because I listened to an interview it was like a mutual interview between Jody Mack, who we've dedicated an episode to on this show, and Blake Williams, who has been on this show and whose movie Prototype I covered at Big Ears. I want to say the same year that I saw the Takashi Mikano film. And Jody Mack mentioned that she thought that Blake Williams' film Prototype reminded her of the work of Takashi Mikano, and I was like, hey, I liked Blake Williams' movie. I liked that Takashi Mikano movie. I'm going to go see what else is available by him. And so I found that he has a Vimeo page. Several of his shorts are on YouTube. And I watched 3 over the past 24 hours, and I really like them. I think they're really singular and interesting and kind of affecting in a very specific way. And I want to just like briefly like sprint through them here. The first one that I watched is actually his debut short, I think. It's called Eve. And it is mostly made up of these close-up shots of barbed wire, like several layers of barbed wire, and it's shot with a really narrow depth of field, and the focus is constantly shifting, and so at times you're only seeing the barbed wire very far away from you, and sometimes only seeing the barbed wire very close to you. But because barbed wire is this reflective surface, all of the other layers of it that you don't have in focus are kind of like gleaming and making these interesting patterns of light. And he overlays that with video footage of water, and it creates this interesting like silvery chrome texture. It's really cool. It's only like a 3-minute short, so maybe go like sample that to get a taste of what sort of thing he does. I also watched a longer one called Tranquil, which came out in 2007. And it reminded me a lot of drone ambient artists, specifically people like Cellar and Gas, in how it just like trying to capture this one kind of resonant tone. And in Tranquil, he's shooting mostly the sun through like a really heavy thicket of trees in the woods, and it's the color is so dark that the way that the light is kind of like shining through the cracks in the leaves ends up looking kind of like stars, like you're looking at the cosmos or something. And he starts stacking different video or different shots of these trees on top of each other to the point they start the light kind of crisscrosses over each other and creates this interesting like twinkling effect. And there's a beautiful ambient drone in the score as well. It's like a combination of what sounds like either running water or just like mechanical white noise over this like oscillating, really low guitar drone. Really enjoyed that. And then I would say the most affecting one I watched was the most recent. That is called Ghost of OT301. And that is kind of similar to Eve, the first one I talked about, like very silver. It feels very, I don't know, kind of hard, like you're looking at like a very shiny concrete or something. And it's super hard to tell what exactly he's making the images out of in this one, because there's just so many layers of image stacked on top of each other, kind of like in that movie 2012 I was talking about earlier, to where it all just kind of coalesces into this big, one word for it is like a palimpsest of you can't quite tell where one image ends and one image begins. Sometimes I feel like his movies, they feel like these big like monolithic surfaces where to watch them is to kind of like slide your hands across them, like you are feeling them more than you are seeing them. And as this one goes on, you start to kind of get more glimpses of discrete images. What seems like bodies kind of shuffling one way or another. They seem to be covered in like, I don't know, these robes or tarps or something like that. And it has this very melancholy feel. There's this like post-rock kind of melancholic guitar music that comes in the last half of it. And the color starts to sort of morph into a sickly kind of green, brown, pink, purple. And I did a very cursory Google after I finished the short, which again is called Ghost of OT301, and found that OT301 is actually like a neighborhood where a very large community of homeless people lived, and then were like forcibly removed, and that kind of gave the short a little bit more resonance to me. The idea that it's like trying to capture this mournful and also sort of violent atmosphere as this community is sort of being shuffled out of this urban area. So really, really interesting, like textural, atmospheric, kind of tactile work that also kind of has a bit of a political undercurrent to it as well. Again, Takashi Mikano is the guy's name. You can find a bunch of stuff on Vimeo and YouTube. I'd recommend seeking out anything you can if any of that sounds interesting to you.
Nice. Yeah. Well, check out Vimeo and YouTube if you are interested for more. Staying on the avant-garde film thread, I figure I'll catch us up on where I'm at with watching the Pirates of the Caribbean series. I guess short story, I finished them. Shout out to, I guess, not really, but Disney Plus for having Disney movies on their service for once, I guess. I don't know. Good for you. Ironically enough, just side note, they have all the Pirates of the Caribbean movies except for On Stranger Tides. So I think they agree with me that that's a flaming pile of shit. They're just like, get that out of here. We're not going to even offer it on our service. The first note I'd like to make is that nothing pales in comparison to the original Pirates trilogy of movies by Gore Verbinski. Like, A+ swashbuckling blockbuster filmmaking. I was thinking about it when I finished the third one, because the third one, I'll say, is easily the weakest of the three, but that's because it comes in at a whopping 2 hours and 45 minutes, which I feel like is just somewhat absurd for a, I think, 2 hours and 15 is a nice sweet spot, I guess, if you want to have an overlong blockbuster, but, aim for that nice 2 hour mark, Pirates of the Caribbean. That being said, Dead Man's Chest and At World's End, number 2 and 3, both great in their own regards. First off, massive shout out to the incredible visual, effects work and costume design work that they do in Dead Man's Chest for Davy Jones, because those tentacles and the crustacean ship people, sailor people that he has are terrifying. Just perfect non-secular. They're just bad people. That guy's got a shark head. We know that he's a bad guy. But the thing I was thinking about that I guess is kind of the staple for Gore Verbinski, at least in his mark on the series, is that he really does have a knack for creating these wonderful. It's not breaking news that this is based on a ride at Disney World, and he does kind of create these semi theme park set pieces that in the under the guise of being a giant blockbuster summer movie for Disney is absolutely what you want. You want to go to the movie theater and have a giant screen and watch Orlando Bloom and the other white British dude fight with swords on top of this giant wheel while Johnny Depp is sprinting across the island and all of these the shark head people are chasing him. He's able to kind of have or have 3 different set pieces going all at once, and then they're able to kind of converge on one another, and then he's able to splinter it again. It has this wonderful roller coaster feel to it that the last 2 movies were just unable to replicate. And I feel probably that the Pirates movies especially are much more indebted to the Indiana Jones series than maybe we give it credit for. These are kind of these seem very much the predecessors to, or the what would be the evolution of the Indiana Jones series in terms of what the modern blockbuster would look like. And so I also kind of felt I get it. Johnny Depp's a little bit of a problematic figure. We don't really want to support Johnny Depp. I will say that these movies are, I think, more based in the the Disney machine and just kind of the just the overall the characters, the settings, all that stuff more than just Johnny Depp, as they learned in the last two movies.
Tim Burton movies.
Yeah, like the last two movies really leaned heavily on Jack Sparrow, and it was like, oh, that makes it boring. So it's I was like, while rewatching through, I was really impressed with how much, like, how key Keira Knightley and Orlando Bloom and Bill Nighy and his, as Davy Jones, and you have like the two pirates, like the guy with the eye and the other guy, and then you have Kevin McNally as his first mate Gibbs just through the entire series. All of those kind of like side characters really are able to kind of shine in their, they over the 2.5 hour runtime or 45-minute runtime are able to like make their small moments count. And I don't know, it's just like, if this, like, it seems like the epitome of what we can get to an extent with blockbusters, especially from like a corporate model. And so A+ from the Pirates of the Caribbean original trilogy. Now then we get to the last two. On Stranger Tides, I remember hating this and or falling asleep during this when it came out. I don't know what you expected when you put Rob Marshall in charge of any movie, but On Stranger Tides is not great. It because Orlando Bloom and Keira Knightley have left the series, it like leans heavily on Johnny Depp as Jack Sparrow, and it's clear that he's kind of you need to kind of let him sprinkle that in on occasion, but it can't be like the full course meal that you're getting. And they really don't offer any side characters that are all that engaging. I mean, you have Penelope Cruz, who kind of takes the Keira Knightley role. They give a little bit more expanded kind of a more expanded role to Jeffrey Rush as Barbossa. They add Ian McShane in as Blackbeard, and then it adds Sam Claflin, who, let's raise your hand if you can think off the top of your head who Sam Claflin is, and it's one of the white dudes from the Hunger Games movies. So good luck trying to figure out which one that is. I'm not even gonna like specify what his character is. I'm gonna let you guys figure that out. It tries really hard to kind of get the Rob Marshall can't direct anything, and so when he's trying to direct action on the scale of like what Gore Verbinski was able to accomplish in the last 3 movies, it just overall falls flat. And they're kind of they're kind of grasping at straws in terms of the story. I mean, story is never really the point of the Pirates movies. It's kind of just let's get them in a scenario that makes like a decent amount of sense. I mean, like the Dead Man's Chest one is just nonsense. It's just Davy Jones. I mean, at one point, literally, Davy Jones is playing an organ on his ship, which I'm like, why does he have an organ on his ship?
Is that in that movie? I thought that was way earlier.
It is, and it's incredible. He's playing that, and he's playing like the big organ piece, Hans Zimmer, like the sounds going crazy.
He's playing it with his tentacles, too.
Yeah, he's playing it with
over the place.
So then you got the VFX stuff going. It's like the tentacles are going, and he's like crying, and he like has like the one tear like he's Denzel in Glory, and it's just, whew, it's great. That's moving pictures, y'all. Let me tell you. So on Stranger Tides, just skip it. Dead Men Tell No Tales. I never saw this when it came out a couple years ago. I'm glad I didn't. It's not great. It kind of gets a little bit of like the, this is fun. Here's some kind of crazy set piece. Like the new directors, I don't know who the hell they are, but they have a little bit more idea of like how to craft like a set piece. But man, if the last one was grasping at straws for like some sort of, this is like what the basics of our plot will be, this one is struggling too. They bring back Orlando Bloom, and he looks angry that he's here. They tie in one of the characters as Barbossa's kid, and it makes no sense because the timelines of this whole thing are just like, who was having sex with Barbossa at that period in time. Paul McCartney is in it for whatever reason, and like has like an extended sequence of just like talking to Johnny Depp. Like, I don't know what about this series screamed, let's get like baby boomer rock stars like Paul McCartney and Keith Richards involved in this series, but like this is where we're at. It's not great. Javier Bardem is I don't know what, like, townhouse, condo, villa he was trying to pay off, but like, good for him. He got his check.
Well, there was a period where they were casting Javier Bardem as the villain in every movie. It was this and is it Skyfall that he's the villain in?
But Skyfall is clearly him. Like, they literally were like, just do No Country for Old Men, but James Bond is the other guy. This one, he's not even doing that he's not doing that shtick. It's just he's kind of like an angry ghost, and you're like, okay, cool. He's not doing like any creepy interrogations or anything, and just being overly weird. It's more they put a bunch of computer effects on him, and he's like, I'm a ghost and I don't like Johnny Depp, and I'm like, yeah, none of us do, but yeah, it's not great. But really, bringing it to a close, let me just say that the OG first 3 Pirates of the Caribbean are quality entertainment. High recommend on checking those out. I mean, again, Davy Jones plays the organ on his ship, and then Hans Zimmer's got his whole like da 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 da, and he's like got the organ going. It's just like never, like nothing's ever. And again, I'm gonna reiterate this. I said this last time, but like no blockbuster is so just crazily weird as this series. Like especially the Gore Verbinski ones, they're just so like strange and grotesque and kind of horny all at the same time, and we need that again in our blockbusters. And that's why, as your president in 2020, I will happily request that we get back to these types of blockbusters. Were you one of the people who
really went to bat for Valerian when that came out?
Also like that movie, but I also have not seen it in like 4 years.
A similar spirit, right?
Yeah. I like large, stupid blockbusters, but they know how. Like Pirates of the Caribbean is like not trying to be anything else. It's like, listen, I'm gonna be loud and I'm gonna be big and loud and dumb and so fun to watch, and I'm like, cool, that sounds great. Like, it knows exactly what it is, and I appreciate that. It's not going for anything bigger. Shout out to you, Pirates of the Caribbean and Gore Verbinski. So that's the end of my diary, and that's my platform is make blockbusters weird, grotesque, and horny again. The end. All right, well, we're gonna take a quick break. Speaking of weird, grotesque, and horny, and talk about 1987's RoboCop after this.
Hello, Cinematary listeners. This is your favorite Filipino podcaster, Jessica Carr. I'm here to let you know about a couple of things that Cinematary offers that you might not know about. First, if you're a fan of what Cinematary is doing, please consider joining us on Patreon. Remember when we weren't clamoring for your dollars? Well, now we're just clamoring for 5 of your dollars. So please help us and donate to our Patreon, and then you'll get exclusive content from our staff, including our Film Theory and Chill series, where a panel takes a piece of theory each month and deconstructs it before diving into whatever topic is on their mind from the past week. The $5 each month is investment in the website and the podcast, and it goes solely to paying our writers for the reviews each week, so please consider doing it. It's only $5. If you missed an episode of Cinematary or a piece of writing we've had, you should consider signing up for our free newsletter. Each Sunday, we send out a note with the latest podcast episode, piece of Patreon content, and the last 2 reviews that we've written at cinematary.com. It's perfect for those of you who are interested in what's happening, and it makes sure that you don't miss a single Cinematary review. Finally, the easiest thing that you can do to help us is to please give us a rating and review on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever else you're using to listen to the show. This helps us get more eyeballs and ears on the podcast and the website, and it helps the people know about Cinematary, which is really what we're here for. So to recap, consider donating to our Patreon, sign up for the free newsletter, and give us a rating or review. We would really appreciate if you could do these things. Thank you for listening, and now back to the show.
we are back with part 2 of episode 313 of Cinematary. In this part, we will be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1987's RoboCop. Directed by Paul Verhoeven from a script by Edward Neumeier and Michael Miner. The film stars Peter Weller, Nancy Allen, Miguel Ferrer, Daniel O'Harely, and Kurtwood Smith. From that 70s show. In a violent, near-apocalyptic Detroit evil corporation, Omni Consumer Products wins a contract from the city government to privatize the police force. To test their crime-eradicating cyborgs, the company leads street cop Alex Murphy into an armed confrontation with crime lord Boddicker so they can use his body to support their untested RoboCop prototype. But when RoboCop learns of the company's nefarious plans, he turns on his masters. RoboCop was the first major Hollywood production for Paul Verhoeven. Although he had been working in the Netherlands for more than a decade, he moved to Hollywood in 1984 to seek broader opportunities. Verhoeven recalled that when he first glanced through the script, he discarded it in disgust. Afterwards, his wife, after picking the script from the bin and reading it more thoroughly, convinced him that the plot had more substance than he had originally assumed. Repo Man director Alex Cox was offered the opportunity to direct before Verhoeven came on board. And Kenneth Johnson, who is creator of television series V, The Bionic Woman, and The Incredible Hulk, said that he was offered the chance to direct but turned it down when he was not allowed to change aspects of the script that he considered to be, quote, mean-spirited, ugly, and ultra-violent. Although both Neumeier and Verhoeven have declared themselves staunchly on the political left, Neumeier recalls on the audio commentary to Starship Troopers that many of his liberal friends perceived RoboCop as a fascist movie. On the 20th anniversary DVD, producer John Davison referred to the film's message as, quote, fascism for liberals, a politically liberal film done in the most violent way possible. I'll let that sink. Before Peter Weller was cast, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Rutger Hauer, and Michael Ironside were favored to play RoboCop by Verhoeven and the producers, respectively. However, each man's large frame would have made it difficult for either of them to move in the cumbersome RoboCop suit, which had been modeled on hockey gear and designed to be large and bulky. Weller won the role both because Verhoeven felt that he could adequately convey pathos with his lower face, and because Weller was especially lithe and could more easily move inside the suit than a bigger actor. So pretty much he won because he could fit in the suit. Weller had prepared extensively for the role using a padded costume, as development of the actual RoboCop suit was 3 weeks behind schedule, so by the time shooting was underway and the costume had arrived, Weller discovered he was almost unable to move in it and needed additional training to become accustomed to it. He later revealed to Roger Ebert that during filming he was losing 3 pounds a day due to sweat loss while wearing the suit in 100-degree temperatures. Weller's personal assistant Todd Trotter was responsible for keeping the actor cool in between takes with electric fans, and when available, large ducts connected to freestanding air conditioning units. The suit later had a fan built into it. The task of creating the RoboCop suit was given to Rob Bottin. The studio decided that Bottin would be the ideal person to create the suit, as he had just finished doing the special effects for John Carpenter's The Thing. A budget of up to $1 million was allotted to the completion of the suit, making it the most expensive item on the set. A total of 6 suits were made, 3 intact and 3 showing damage. Bottin himself had produced early design sketches for the suit's prototype that the studio accepted enthusiastically, albeit with the request of some minor adjustments. Rob, Paul Verhoeven, and Edward Neumeier came up with the concept of the suit being more of an outer shell with very little of the actor's actual face being visible. Bottin explained the basis of the design, saying, quote, it's meant to look very speedy and aerodynamic. All the lines were measured to go on a slant, forward, forward, forward. All the lines were geometric and complement every shape on the body from all angles. When Verhoeven came on the project, he requested numerous design changes, additions to the suit, which looked more like a machine than man-like. I've never done so many conceptual drawings for a director in my entire life. However, the design ended up bearing a closer resemblance to Bottin's original design. He said, quote, RoboCop looks the way he does because that's the way a man's body works. Although we went through 50 different variations developing his character, everything came back to man-like. It's definitely a guy in the suit, which doesn't belittle it at all. In the DVD director's commentary, Verhoeven explained that he intentionally chose to cast Kurtwood Smith and Ronnie Cox against type by making them the central villains. Cox was an actor who until then was primarily known for nice guy roles such as fatherly figures, and Smith had been cast as more intellectual characters. Verhoeven chose to outfit Smith's character Clarence Boddicker in rimless glasses because of their intellectual association, creating a disparity in the character that Verhoeven found akin to the similarly bespectacled Heinrich Himmler, who, for those who are unfamiliar with who Heinrich Himmler is, he is one of the designers of the Holocaust.
Wait, which character is designed after Himmler?
The Kurtwood Smith character.
Okay.
Yeah. The movie was originally given an X rating by the MPAA in 1987 due to its graphic violence. To appease the requirements of the ratings board, Verhoeven reduced the blood and gore in the most violent scenes in the movie, including Edie 209's shooting of Kenny in the boardroom, Bobby being shot in the leg, the Boddicker gang's execution of Murphy with shotguns, and the final battle with Boddicker. Verhoeven also added humorous commercials throughout the news broadcast to lighten the mood and distract from the violent aspects of the movie. Most of the commercials satirize various aspects of the American consumer culture, such as the commercial for the 6000 SUX sedan. After 11 original X ratings, the film was eventually given an R rating for graphic violence, strong language, and brief nudity. Verhoeven stated on the 2007 Anniversary Edition DVD that he wanted the violence to be, quote, over the top in an almost comical fashion, such as the scene involving the executive being killed and Bob Morton immediately asking, "Somebody want to call a goddamn paramedic?" Verhoeven felt that the tone of the violence was more upsetting due to the deletions requested by the MPAA. In 1987, the New York Times said, "If it's violence you're after, RoboCop gives full value. In his first American movie, Paul Verhoeven doesn't let the furiously futuristic plot get in the way of the flaming explosions, shattering glass, and hurling bodies. Everything's constantly on the move in this movie, full of camera tricks and computer tricks. If you glance away, chances are you'll miss somebody being blown away. Fortunately, the victims of the handheld cannons that everybody shoots at everybody else take so long dying that you have plenty of time to enjoy their pain. When a baddie goes crashing into a toxic waste tank, he not only staggers out looking hideous, but staggers on, getting hideouser and hideouser." In 1987, Roger Ebert said, "Most thriller and special effects movies come right off the assembly line. You can call out every development in advance and usually be right. RoboCop is a thriller with a difference." And then, let's dive into RoboCop. I believe, has everybody seen this movie before the episode?
Sort of.
Yeah, you said that you had maybe seen it as a kid. Upon revisiting, can you confirm that you watched this as a kid?
I think that maybe I watched like the second or the third one in bits and pieces. Like, it feels like something that was on like the Sci-Fi channel that my dad was watching, and I was like in the same room as him. But I didn't remember any of the plot points. So
I'm assuming the second and the third one are a lot more like rah-rah cops than this one is.
I haven't even seen.
Yeah.
Well, Jessica, Cam, what did you all make of RoboCop on this watch?
Go ahead.
I think the movie is very funny and super fun to watch. I honestly was going into it thinking like, oh, this is gonna be a satire, like whatever, and it was really funny. Like there were like so many things in it that were so funny, and like I think that Verhoeven like has a really good way of weaving like dark comedy into his satire, and it being a thing of like you laughing at it and then thinking like, ugh,
yeah,
like that's not very good. And he does that in Starship Troopers, and he also does that in this film, where like when you see the people on the news, like in RoboCop, like the anchors are saying like lots of terrible things that are happening, like tons of people are dying and all of these terrible things are happening in the world, but like they're like smiling and doing the whole like, we're TV anchors, so let's give you some news. But it's like there's like this dissonance between what they're saying and how they're acting, and also like everything that's on TV is very weird. Like there's that I'd buy that for $1 commercial thing.
Is it a commercial or is it like a sitcom?
I have no idea.
I think it's supposed to be like a sitcom, yeah, but I don't know.
But it's like always playing on TV, which is why I would thought that it was a commercial, but it's probably a TV show that everyone's just watching. But it like plays throughout the movie, and also characters start saying it. like, also, like, one of the executives of the big company, like, he's like, yeah, I'd buy that for $1. And every single time, like, Cam's face would light up with joy. Like, he thought that it was the funniest shit ever. And also, the first time that it is said on screen, he just, like, dies laughing, and I didn't think it was that funny. Like, I was like, okay. But as the movie progressed, I was like, okay, this shit is gonna, like, keep repeating over and over and over again. And it just starts becoming, like, even funnier. But, like, overall, I liked the movie. I thought that it was really funny. And I weirdly, like, kind of started to feel bad for the RoboCop. Like, towards the end, like, he starts becoming the only character that you empathize with. And, like, at the end, whenever he says, like, the guy's like, what's your name? And he's like, Murphy. And then he's like, oh yeah. And he, like, smiles. I, like, melted. Like, I was like, what the heck? So, Cam, what'd you think about the movie?
I've seen RoboCop probably like 4 or 5 times now. I, like, watched it for the first time when I was, like, really, really young, and thought, I remember watching it, and, like, I think I even had, like, a RoboCop action figure when I was a kid. And I remember thinking, like, this is kind of weird. Like, that I have this action figure, and this is a movie where I think that I, like, pulled it off of, like, some relative's shelf and watched it or something. And I think that my dad liked it. I can't really remember. But... I remember thinking it was kind of weird that the movie was so, like, horrific at certain points, but then there were, like, action figures and shit that you could buy, and, like, the movie was, like, you know, saying, you know, fuck and all that, and yet, like, in the kids aisle, like, you can get the action figure. And then, like, when I got a little older, I remember, like, thinking about the movie and thinking about how weird it was, and, like, watching it and just, like, falling in love with the movie. And having watched it a couple of times since then, it's, like, a movie that, like, I laugh, like, basically the entire way through it usually. But at the same time, I think, like, basically what you were saying, Jessica, of, like, you laugh, but then you're also like, oh God, like, it's so awful. But the comedy, I think part of it works not only because it is so kind of, like, biting, but also because, like, there is just some good comedic timing in it. I always remember there's, like, a point where RoboCop, like, comes in, he's, like, busting up this big huge drug deal, and all the main, you know, criminal characters are there.
Oh,
and he
yeah.
he runs down this, like, laundry list of, like, here is what everybody is being charged for, and everybody needs to put their weapon down, or I'm gonna, you know, go do my RoboCop thing in here. And there's a guy holding a shotgun. He's, like, one of the villains who had shot him before, and he just cocks the shotgun and goes, fuck you, and just starts shooting at him. And I've always thought it was really funny how it's like...
Oh, there's another detail in that scene where he, like, knocks a gun out of somebody's hand, and it flies across the room, and a dancer just catches it and then looks at it for a second and then just starts dancing with the gun in his hand.
That's when he goes and gets Ray Wise out of the club.
Scene.
Yeah,
that's in the dance.
This is a little after, when he's, like, going in to bust up the big, where all of the villain characters have kind of, like, coalesced.
Yeah,
together.
That's like the cocaine, drug dealing.
But it's just, I've always thought it was so funny because he's like, oh, you know, you got to do this and do that and do this and put your gun down and blah 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 blah. And here I am, I'm RoboCop, I'm in the middle of everybody, and the guy just goes, fuck you, and shoots at him, like, immediately.
Well, his, like, RoboCop's delivery is, like, is robotic.
Right.
Like, he is a robot man, and everyone else is like, ooh.
A robot cop even. Yeah.
And everybody else reacting to him is what is so funny.
Yeah. And I remember being a kid and being really into, like, comic books and things like that, and feeling this weird sort of, like, resonance with the movie and the way that, like, the like, fast talking criminals kind of, like, interact with each other, being very similar to that and all that type of stuff. But it was when I got older that I was, like, started to think that A, the violence was really, really funny, and B, the like, all of the commentary of the movie that is landing sometimes as just, like, oh wow, this is, like, just a flagrant in your face thing, and then sometimes in joke form of, like, oh, this is RoboCop. He's like our good cop guy. Yes, he totally did just walk into the store and clothesline a guy he threw him through like a glass thing. Doesn't arrest him, doesn't do anything. He's just like, okay, thank you guys, I'm gonna leave now, and he just like walks out the door. But like,
I thought multiple times about that Sailor Moon meme where she says to Tuxedo Vest, like, or he says, "My work here is done," and she's like, "But you didn't do anything," and he just like sweeps his cape up and
very
leaves.
very much what RoboCop is about. He oftentimes like it's really funny too, because he talks a lot about like, you're under arrest, or like, I'm gonna take you dead or alive, like that sort of thing. We get this kind of like there's like that spot like right after he kind of becomes RoboCop where we get him like solving lots of crimes, right? Like right back to back to back. And in all of the cases, he either just like kills the person just like straight out, or he'll like beat the shit out of them and then just like leave them there. And it's just like
trashes the convenience store that he stopped from being held up.
And then like on his way out of the convenience store, he like turns to the people and he's like, "Thank you for your compliance." And like walks out. But I think that it's like the movie is like, what makes the movie so like, I think, entertaining is that, or I'm sorry, what makes the movie so effective for me is that it is like doing this satirical thing, doing it like with a relative like bluster and clumsiness that I think is kind of like funny, but then it's also like very entertaining. Like they weren't like trying to be like, we are going to make this so like dour and like related to what we see all the time, that like it's kind of a bummer to watch. It's like talking about lots of things, like complicated things in a lot of cases. Like there's a whole subplot going on with like police unions and like that, and like there's all this stuff going on with corporatization and militarization of the police, and the way that the ways that's going through. But the whole time you're kind of like, you keep bouncing back to like these scenes of RoboCop like making a stupid face and walking through a door, or like throwing a guy through a window and then picking him up and then walking into another room so he can throw him out another window, and like doing stuff like that I think like keeps the movie moving in a way that makes it like really, really fun to watch. But yeah, that's, yeah.
Andrew, what about you?
Yeah, I will totally co-sign all the things y'all have said about the amusing nature of so many details and scenes in this movie. And I'll dig a little bit more into the sort of allegorical political undertones of this thing, which is the main level on which I admire it. I can't really think about RoboCop separately from Verhoeven's larger body of work and what feels to me like his bigger political project. I think about him in a very similar light the way I think about Douglas Sirk, director who immigrated from Germany and then made movies in America kind of about the fascistic tendencies of America. As well, Sirk was doing it, when World War II is a very recent memory and ongoing in some cases. But Verhoeven is like a generation removed from that, and he sort of amplifies certain like violent elements because he's working in a different mode. Sirk is doing these like very sultry melodramas. Verhoeven is making these like trashy genre pictures. And so that lets him kind of crank up the violence a little bit, which I think it is used to very great comedic effect, but it also has a lot of political bite to it. Like the scene where the big like non-humanoid RoboCop comes out in the conference room and like shoots the guy up in front of all these suits. It's like a really gruesome machine gunning scene. And I think about that in a similar way, the way I think about the way some of the violence is used in Starship Troopers, like the scene where that rookie cadet basically gets a knife thrown through his hand by his sergeant. And that's a movie kind of about the way that American culture fetishizes police violence to the point of not being that different from the Nazis. This is a movie about the way American culture sort of fetishizes cop violence in a way that's not that different from the Nazis. And like you were saying, there's a really interesting threads you could pull on in a lot of different directions, like the way that cities will often sort of privatize out certain elements of law enforcement to firms that don't have any real motivation other than profit. So what's to really keep them protecting and serving the community, so to speak, especially when we know in our more modern milieu that there's a lot of money changing hands in the militarization of police, where police buy these military equipment that's been decommissioned, and then there's a financial incentive to use it so that you can maybe get more later on. And there's also the whole thread about the police sort of colluding with these organized crime rings to put drugs in poor communities, which was definitely happening with the crack epidemic in the years surrounding RoboCop's release. So, I mean, there's more to talk about, of course. There always is with Verhoeven's stuff on a political level, but that's the main way in which I appreciate this movie. I think it falls short a little bit for me just as a narrative. I find things like Starship Troopers and what's the big one that I like? Total Recall, a little bit more effective as movies, but I think the political commentary here is really, really sharp.
Yeah, I mean, I think that with Starship Troopers and with RoboCop both, tying them together as where they're both glorifying types of state violence is it's kind of I don't know. It's interesting though, because in Starship Troopers, it's very clearly laying this whole thing at the feet of here is a post-fascist state, right? This is a society that's already fully bought in, right? Whereas with RoboCop, there's still some fuzziness where there are people where it almost is depicting how you can get to Starship Troopers, right? Where it's the people being motivated by profit who have kind of made their way into the state, and where those lines are very starting to blur, and then the people who are pushing back against that are even themselves in some cases being sort of brought into it, where even people who would be staunchly combatively anti-police in the sense that they're cop killers, for example, right? In RoboCop, it's already we're already past the point where those people have already been folded in. There is no it's when you see Starship Troopers, it's you're watching something that it's we're way past the point of no return with this society that's being depicted. But in RoboCop, it's sometimes you get glimpses of the it's not, but then every once in a while you're yanked back really hard of oh wait, this whole thing is fucked all the way.
The programming in of the Directive 4, the idea that he can't prosecute is the wrong word, but take action against somebody who's high on the bureaucratic hierarchy, feels very similar to the idea of qualified immunity, right? And this is a society that it's set sort of in the future, but it's also birthing that in the moment.
Yeah, where it's those different things are sort of bouncing around each other. It's not 100% completely full blown get in a spaceship, fly to space, and go be space Nazis out there. It's not quite there yet, but you're in this space where it's in a way, like almost more, it's like you said, maybe a little bit more like politically admirable because it is so tight, like so close to like how American culture like both fetishizes police violence and authority of police, and also fetishizes like the, you know, this omni-corporate structure that is in place above the police and kind of yanking on the strings, and where like the only form of like the only form of justice that can like come to them in this movie is through RoboCop, who is himself is kind of like his own little like he in himself is kind of like his own little like micro thing of like, here is your quote unquote good cop who's getting like beat the heck down all the time and turned into this like ruthless killing machine where like he can do nothing but just slaughter en masse everywhere he goes, and like can't really do anything, he can't even like function properly as a person anymore, and has this like weird infantilization thing going on where he has to like eat baby food and people have to take care of him and like all this stuff.
Yeah, that part sucked. Like, ugh, no.
Yeah, Jessica, you mentioned earlier how you felt a certain amount of sadness for RoboCop, or a certain amount of empathy for him, and you definitely get that in some of the scenes in the last act, like after he's sort of removed the helmet and you just kind of see him like sitting around in that abandoned factory with his like little face that's like grafted onto all this like mechanized stuff in the back of his head, and
his little face and his large forehead.
I think it's an interesting movie to consider in relation to the leftist mantra, all cops are bastards, because it's the movie kind of paints RoboCop himself as a person like stuck in this robotic shell as a victim in a way, a victim of this like system that he's been programmed by, like literally programmed by. And that phrase, one that Cam and I have had a lot of conversations about, almost like it goads the person on the other end of it into saying, like, well, not all the people in the police force are bad. My uncle's a good person and he's in the police force. But it's really like that phrase, it's not really about the souls of the people, right? It's about the system they work for and the system that has trained them. And so RoboCop as a character is in this interesting in-between space where he's like been fully rewired by this violent system, but just as a person, the movie doesn't judge his humanity, really.
Yeah, I think that it's really easy to empathize and kind of feel bad for him when he's in his little like, when he is in his big head mode, you know.
Well, I think that's the reason why we're given the Lewis character, played by Nancy Allen. Like, she is very empathetic towards him because she knew him when he was a person, and she actually witnessed him getting shot to death. And then she sees him as this like machine, and she realizes that he is no longer a human being. And like, it's weird because the scenes with them together, whenever he had just like gotten like almost beat up by that other larger cop, like robotic cop thing, whatever that was, like the stop motion like robot thing that shoots at him, and he's like going to recover, and she's trying to take care of him, and he's like, don't touch me. Like, leave me alone.
Yeah.
And
she has to kind of go rogue against the police force in order to ally with him.
Well,
in
like
the last act
when
of the
he
film.
goes into and has his little confrontation with Ed and the CEO guy, like he comes out of the place and it's like, who is it when he tries to do anything? It isn't just his like the, you know, the dumbass fourth directive thing that stops him. It is also the police. Like the police come after him. So yeah, but I think that you are kind of like positioned to feel something for old Murph under the under the shell though. Which I think, like you were saying, Andrew, kind of does tie back to that thing of like not an individual judgment. It's like a systemic statement, you know?
Yeah, but he is still a bastard because we talked about that, like Cam and I did, and we were like, all cops are bastards, including Murphy, who like still is a bastard. So
yeah, I mean,
can't help it.
You do feel sad because he's got a big head, and he is sad in his warehouse, and he thinks about his kids and stuff. But he does still like rip a guy out of a room through a wall and throw him out of the building from like the second floor, and then he also like clotheslines a guy so hard that he like does a backflip and flies into something else, and then he's like, "See you later. The day is saved."
Also, whenever that woman is being chased by those two guys with a knife and they're attempting to rape her, like he comes in and you're like, okay, like save her, like this woman needs your help, and like the guy holds her hostage and pulls her up, and he like detects where her legs are and shoots in between her legs to shoot the guy in the crotch. And then like later she runs up to him and is like, oh, thank you so much. And he's like, all right, I need to call like a rape crisis center to help you out.
He says because she's like hugs him.
Yeah,
she like runs to him and is like, thank you so much, you saved me. And he says, ma'am, you have experienced an emotional shock.
Yeah.
Zach, we've kind of boxed you out of this conversation a little bit. What are your thoughts on RoboCop?
Oh, no, we're way past that. So, the one thing I do want to bring up...
I think we have Robo-Zach right now.
Yeah, we just have Robo-Zach. No, the one thing I wanted to bring up, because the movie kind of skirts by it for the most part, it doesn't really engage in this, is I think it's really interesting that it uses Detroit specifically as its location. You know, it could have been Chicago, it could have been Boston, it could have been New York, like those seem like, or Los Angeles, like those seem like basic places. It chooses Detroit, and it's kind of interesting also.
I like the touch of it being old Detroit, by the way.
Yeah, and it's old Detroit, which, you know, kind of has its own connotation in 2020 as anything else. But I think it's, you know, just real quickly looking at some census data from the 1980s, you look at just think about like the characters, and especially the criminal characters in RoboCop. I mean, in 1980, 34.3% of the population of Detroit is white. 63% of it is black. In 2010, it's even smaller than that. You have 14% of the population in Detroit is white, and 78% is black. I think it's kind of interesting that you see I mean, for the most part, the villains are like white entrepreneuring kind of men, especially like the main one who is a corporate corporate executive. And that also is kind of interesting because you look at like the landscape of Detroit in the last decade. In 2010, you have Dan Gilbert, who is the CEO of Quicken Loans, who brings his giant mortgage company into downtown Detroit and literally like takes over the downtown part of the city, as you know. And this is just a few years before the city of Detroit declared bankruptcy. He owns like over $5 billion in properties in downtown Detroit, and almost 100% of those is, you know, office or residential properties. He employs, you know, almost 20,000 people, so he has like this giant influence over the, you know, employment base as well as the taxpayer in Detroit. And so just kind of, you know, I'd be curious on y'all's perspective just on like the big business, big corporation aspect of this movie. I think that's why I think it's really interesting that they choose Detroit, because Detroit is very much next to something like San Francisco, which is a city that's become overrun by a corporation trying to, like, it's taken over the downtown space of Detroit and is pretty much like, you know, trying to revitalize and gentrify it itself. And so, you know, I think it's easy to point at like an Apple or an Amazon or Google, you know, like point at like one of those companies as like kind of the modern day parallel. But I think it's interesting just to bring up Quicken Loans and Dan Gilbert as like, no, Detroit is like dealing with a corporate overlord who is pretty much running the city today.
Yeah. you have this corporation OCP, which stands for Omni Consumer Products, which is about the best like corporate overlord name you could get. And the guy who's at the head of it, or at least second in command, I guess, is also seems to be high up on the bureaucratic side of the police force. The guy who programmed Directive 4 into RoboCop, and I often. I mean, throughout the whole film and even now, I have a hard time telling, like, well, what is your job exactly? Are you part of the police force or are you part of this corporation? And I think that blurring of those lines and is part of the point. And also the fact that he has his hand in some, like, military funds that are being thrown his way.
Yeah, and that's one of the critiques I kind of have of the movie, not to get like super like local level politics with it, but I felt like there was not enough of a explicit, like we saw it on screen connection with like city officials. Like they hint at like this like this city contract and stuff like that, but like in order for I mean, just to get really boring, in order for RoboCop to, like, when they bring him into the police headquarters and are like installing him in there, like the police would not be shocked by that. I mean, that's of course dramatic effect, but like they would have to know because there probably was some long litigation through, you know, city council and stuff that got to them to that point. And I just feel like, not to say that we needed that in order for it to be more valid. I'm like, no, that makes no sense to add that to a movie. But I felt like, you know, we really had like this is the corporate side massaging, you know, what should happen in the city. And I felt like there was some complicity with the city government as well. And we never really see that side. And I felt like that's kind of lacking.
I was just going to say that the world of city policing is different from the world of public education. But I know from experience in public education that like a lot of corporate shit gets like funneled through really quickly without it seeming like a lot of people are having to sign off on it or have to get approval from anybody on a lower level. It's just like there's always some new corporate initiative that's thrown our way, and like nobody really even bats an eye. And I imagine a similar thing is true of the way that police forces are kind of like filtering corporate money and corporate programs. Sorry, I'm gonna have to mute. One sec.
Cam, what were you gonna say?
Like, not only is it kind of, I think, maybe kind of saying something about like the corporate structure stuff just getting kind of like jammed through, but I think in the case of like this movie specifically, I think it is kind of intentionally supplanting the role of local government with corporate structure. And it kind of, like you mentioned, Zach, about like how these kind of like in certain cities of these like mega corporations kind of moving in and buying up a lot of space and stuff like that. And a lot of times realistically you see that applied in a way where there's like where they gain lots of like lobbying sway, and the pressure that they can put on local governments is like immense, to the point where a lot of times like the local governments like don't really have any choice but to kind of like roll over for certain things. But I think in RoboCop, the reason that it works for me, like even without that, is because it seems to me like to be set in a spot where the local government has been basically 100% completely shut out by this corporate force, where now these state-run organizations are now basically acquisitions of a corporate empire, right? And they're basically just being kind of like yanked around the same way you would be if you were working customer service one day for that company, and then it turns out, oh, we're outsourcing all of that, and now you're going to be a salesman. Like the same way that sort of thing can kind of the rug can sort of be yanked out in that kind of like highly corporatized structure. Like I think that it works for me because it seems as if like that is what has been applied to the entirety of the city in this movie, I guess.
Yeah. No, and I don't disagree with you. I think I just would have liked some sort of scene that's like showing, there's something effective about like the demeanor and the way that the kind of corporate suits kind of come in and completely have no respect and completely disregard every police officer and sergeant and everything, and like they just they spend the entire time belittling them and their role in this whole endeavor. And I felt like including like just like the local public officials also, just showing that they really had a run of the system. It's just kind of picking at straws here, but I felt like kind of showing that complicity in terms of the government level would have been helpful.
We also do get that like small siege that's going on at City Hall is like because a local politician has kind of like become unhinged and is like holding people hostage and stuff like that. So like, yeah, I agree though. It could have used like more of that for sure, in like some fashion, but I don't know.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up on RoboCop? I'll just say that I'd buy it for $1.
I was waiting for somebody to say that.
We've been very good about it.
Seriously, though, it's super entertaining, and like all of the actions, I think the action flows really well. And also, like, shout out to that insane, like, body horror scene where that guy gets, like, toxic waste dumped on him, and he looks like a crazy, like, mutated monster. And then gets hit by a car and explodes, like, all over the car. Also, never a dull moment in RoboCop.
Small shout outs to Ray Wise also, who automatically makes everything he's in better.
Oh yeah, he's a really small role.
Yeah, he's just a goon.
And there's another Twin Peaks person in this too, right?
Miguel Ferrer, the guy. Albert.
Yeah,
he's so good in this.
He is also
Twin
great.
Peaks actors, and the dad from that 70s.
Jesse wanted me to shout out dude from that 70s show who looks extremely badass for some reason in this movie, but it was also sobering to hear that he was modeled after Himmler. So I'm sure she'll be happy to hear that.
Yeah. That silly red. All right, well, that will wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter and Instagram at handle @Cinematary, and on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary to see all the movies that we talked about in this episode. Head over to patreon.com/Cinematary. Catch up on our Film Theory and Chill series. Thank you so much. Cam, you're not getting a shout out on this one. I'm sorry.
Oh, darn.
Thank you to Chad Newsom, Christina Daughtry, Cindy Roberts, Harry Eskin, Hell Yeah, Small World, Joe Jordan, Maggie, Matthew Lingo, Pedro Seraphim, Ron Hayes, the kittiest of kittens, Titus Arthur, Tyler Chandler, and Whitney Rio Ross. Thank you so much for your patronage. Next week, we will be concluding our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with our first...
Are we ready to announce our next series yet, or are we going to keep them in suspense for another week?
We'll keep them in suspense. Blah. This is our first Almodovar, though. Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown. It's been, I'm surprised. I'll just say this. I'm going to put us a little bit on blast. Feel like Cinematary lacks in the Spanish language film department. So
it's a region or like a world cinema that I perpetually feel underseen on. And when I do research, I always have a hard time finding stuff. So if people have recs of Spanish language cinema, please send it our way. Yeah.
Send it to us. And if it's Pan's Labyrinth.
Yeah, well, Pan's Labyrinth.
Like, we know that. It's not.
Pan's Labyrinth is good.
It's good, but like we know that. We know that.
We know Pan's Labyrinth. We know Y Tu Mama Tambien. We know Spirit of the Beehive. We know Almodovar. What else is out there? I want to know.
Exactly. Yeah. So hook us up. But I think I'm just pointing that out because I think that's it's interesting that we haven't really dug into many films from that region. So it'll be good. But until next week, thank you guys for listening. We'll see you then.